Hey guys, and something seems off. Did I miss another Tuesday? Oh, I see now. It's Halloween! But it really doesn't feel like it. Well, maybe this pumpkin will get me in the mood and... Ah!
Pac-Man! Everyone knows him, and everyone loves him. The classic arcade game from the 80s that has brought joy to thousands of people, but also one of the first horror games. Seriously, have you ever thought about how terrifying Pac-Man is at the end of the day? I mean, you're literally being chased by ghosts and then you eat them? Yeah, well today's horror games are like this. The 80s were more like BAM! Blinky. The Pac-Man series saw tremendous success throughout the years, but in the year 2000, near the tail end of the PlayStation 1 era, came Pac-Man World. Pac-Man World is monumentally different from its arcade predecessor. It's a 3D platformer, and a pretty fun one at that. Well, it's not entirely 3D, more so 2.5D. Levels take place in these sort of long hallways that, despite not having a lot of platforming, are still fun to traverse. The main thing that makes the levels interesting are the fruits, because once you get one, you can bring it to a fruit door, which is usually just a little bit back from where you just went. The goal is to get the token at the end of the level, and once you get to the end, you can unlock the next level in the world.
Now, why might I be talking about some random PS1 platformer that sold a little more than 1 million units? I'm not. I'm actually talking about something more terrifying than Pac-Man itself, and that is a bad video game.
Pac-Man World for the Game Boy Advance. Wait, what? Yeah, so after both Pac-Man World 1 and Pac-Man World 2, Namco thought it would be a good idea to re-release the game on the Game Boy Advance, a technically weaker system than the PlayStation 1. Why might they have done this? Not entirely sure, actually. Full Fat was the developer of choice in this game, and I wouldn't blame you for not knowing who they are. Looking through their catalog of games, most games look to be around par with Wiffle Ball for DS. I would guess that since they had already worked on porting a few big-name titles to the GBA, they figured that they could just squeeze a few more sales out of it. However, that's all I could really find about this game. The game is surprisingly hard to find information about, despite being similar to the PS1 game. So, what's the deal with this game? Let's find out. Right on the title screen, you can immediately notice some differences between the PS1 and GBA versions. If you haven't played the original, you might not know, but the title music is now replaced with Under Pressure. Now, let's say you press start on the title screen. Well, while on the PS1 version you would find 3 options, the GBA port doesn't give you any, it just pops you straight into the game's quest mode. I'm less upset that the classic Pac-Man isn't on the cartridge, since there were plenty of ways to play that on the GBA, but the maze mode seems like a weird removal. Once you get put into the opening cutscene, it's surprisingly faithful to the opening of the PS1 game. However, while being faithful is a good thing, the cutscenes aren't perfect. Some animations, like the Miss Pac-Man scene, suffer from a great lack of animation frames. If I hadn't seen the original a few times beforehand, I would imagine I would be somewhat confused. When at Toc-Man's party, it's not entirely clear who's actually talking, since it doesn't even change the screen to show who's talking. I understand why they couldn't just cram a video onto the cartridge, but it's disappointing to see the story not be able to be properly introduced. After that, you're put into the game, and you know what? It looks surprisingly good. Some sacrifices had to be made, and honestly, they're pretty forgivable. Obviously, the Game Boy Advance can't quite handle 3D geometry, so instead the game uses an orthographic view. Also, there is heavy dithering on a lot of the game, and if you don't know, dithering is a technique used to give the illusion of more colors available. It's hidden pretty well, since the Game Boy Advance was small enough to mask these imperfections. Watching this recording on a YouTube video is obviously going to make the imperfections clear, but on the official hardware, this game looks much better. Same with the controls, surprisingly enough. Say what you will about controlling a 3D game with a D-pad, but this game feels surprisingly good. In fact, while it supported analog sticks, the original would always lock you to 8 directions, and was designed around it, and the same holds true on the Game Boy Advance. And that's about where my praises end. You could hear it on the title screen, but the soundtrack here is, well, very compromised. Let's start with the good, in that the same pre-recorded songs are played here. I enjoyed the soundtrack in the original, so it's nice to see it come over. However, due to the fact that pre-recorded audio takes up a lot of space, the soundtrack is very much compressed. It's still very listenable despite the small bits that are missing. However, even though the songs are compressed, it doesn't even fit the full tracks. The worst part is how many got removed. Each level used to get its own song, but not anymore. Now, there's only 6 songs in the entire game. Yeah, 6. So, the soundtrack you're getting is incredibly repetitive due to the shorter length and longer loop time, and it sounds inferior to the original. Well, surely they were saving that space for other parts of the game, right? Right? Oh boy, the level count in this game. In the PS1 original, there were 6 worlds with 4 levels each, aside from the Ruins world, which only had 3. So, out of the 23 levels in the original, how many made it over to the GBA port? 12. 12 levels. In fact, they cut an entire world from the game, that being the factory world. All the bosses except for Toc-Man are cut from the game, which is either a bad thing or a good thing depending on who you ask. And the space, funhouse, and mansion worlds all have another level taken out of them. So, the gameplay of Pac-Man World is simple. It's mostly just collecting a lot of items and backtracking a bit to a door with a corresponding fruit. It might not be the deepest gameplay, but I still would say there's plenty of enjoyment to be had from it. Pac-Man has a few basic moves, those being the butt bounce, pellet shoot, and rev roll. If you press A in midair, you'll do a butt bounce, which will make you jump higher and will take out any baddies that you find yourself against. The rev roll is nice to have in that it feels good to just charge and let it rip, but it doesn't really provide a whole lot. It's required in order to use elevators and to open a few things, but otherwise that's about it. It's disappointing to see it have much less usage than the PS1 version, which already didn't use it a lot. Finally, there's the pellet throw, and this move is basically useless. You might occasionally find yourself using it, but most scenarios benefit more from a butt bounce. However, it is nice to see all the moves coming over from the PS1 game. Same with the power-ups. The original had a disappointing too, but they are still fun to use when you get them, and both function the exact same as the original game. The steel ball is similar to Mario's metal cap, where you can't swim and instead sink to the bottom of water. This makes it so you can break chests underwater, revealing fruit and other goodies to collect. While it isn't the deepest use of a power-up, it still works extremely well in this game, and I couldn't imagine it without it. Same with the power pellet, which like the arcade game, will let you chomp up ghosts. Oh yeah, this game also has a health bar. You can only be hit a total of 4 times before you die, but there's plenty of things that provide health throughout the levels. Most of the levels are recreated, for the most part, pretty well on GBA. Since the game is more of a 2.5D game rather than full-on 3D, it's much easier to recreate it on GBA. Most aspects carry over pretty well to the GBA, but some things, such as the rotating platforms and the funhouse levels, needed to be altered a bit in order to make it work smoothly on the GBA. Also, all swimming now takes place in front of the stage rather than under it, but that has very little impact on the game. However, these actually highlight the biggest problem with the platforming in this game, the depth perception. I may give Mario 3D World a lot of criticism for how the depth perception in that game isn't the best, but it is a billion times better than how this game handles it. In most 3D games, you have the ability to see a shadow of where your character is, and at first glance, Pac-Man World for GBA has this too. However, once you start to jump onto a platform, the shadow goes away, and so judging exactly where you are isn't exactly ideal. Luckily, the platforms are mostly placed in positions where this doesn't impact you. Also, some collision between Pac-Man and the level area doesn't work properly sometimes. So while it might look like Pac-Man is on a platform, once it changes, it will immediately force him off. Now, I know this review has been mostly negative, and before I get to the worst part of this game, and the final boss, I want to talk about a few positive aspects of the game. I feel like the original game stretched the levels a bit too long, and so them being ever so slightly shorter is somewhat refreshing, although not great from a longevity standpoint. Also, remember how I mentioned how the bosses being removed could either be a good or bad thing depending on who you talk to? Well, yeah, I think some bosses are actually a good removal. Most of the bosses in the PS1 game were either extremely boring, introduced completely different gameplay changes that you never learned and are just thrust upon you, or completely difficult to the point, you know what, it's Anubis Rex, that's what I'm happy about being gone. That boss fight was so extremely unfair, and for it being a World 2 boss, I wouldn't blame someone for quitting Pac-Man World just for it. Finally, the way you obtain keys in the GBA port is way better. First, I should probably explain how the keys work. In each world, you need to find a key, and each key is able to be used to save one of your Pac friends. All the keys are required to beat the game. In the PS1 original, keys would be somewhat tedious to collect because they would be hidden behind backtracking that may not even be possible if you accidentally die, for example. Now, I'm not entirely sure if there's some keys that you just can't get if you die in the GBA port, but I was able to get all my keys the first time around. Now, let's discuss maybe the worst problem about this port and why you should never pick it up. The live system. Compromised graphics, sound, and depth are all things that you can deal with, but when the live system is so fundamentally broken, it causes the game to be unplayable. Believe it or not, it was a problem in the original too, but to a much lesser degree. In games with a continue system, you generally get a few lives back after you respawn. This is simple game design that has been a staple in gaming since the 80s and 90s. So tell me why, then, that once you get a game over, you are stuck at 0 lives. Now, let me get super defensive on the PS1 version real quick. That version gave you plenty of times to get extra lives. Collecting Donkey Kong Country's Kong-style Pac-Man letters gives you access to a bonus stage that has both lives and collectibles that can funnel into the slots minigame that can happen after every level. Hate slots? You can skip it and still continue to get extra lives. The GBA version, on the other hand, has removed so much of the game that you would think that something as simple as lives would be better, right? It was released 2 years after Pac-Man World 2, which fixed this entirely, right? Right? It wasn't. It was made worse. Now, the Pac-Man letters won't take you to a special stage where you can get extra lives, and you won't be getting any extra collectibles because guess what else was removed? That's right, the slot machine. But surely, you would think that they would keep the skip mechanic and just give you lives if you kept fruits, right? Since lives are necessary for beating the game, right? Nope, they took it out. Similar to the entire game, it was taken out. I'm pretty sure they forgot to even put Pac-Man in this game.
Whew, okay. I'm not gonna let this game get the best of me. We have one more thing to talk about, that being the final boss. And if you don't wish to be spoiled, go here.
Alright, let's go. Toc-Man is extremely similar to the way he is in the PS1 version, and honestly, his fight is a lot of fun. There's a good mix of difficulty, and I would say my death ratio felt pretty fair. He wasn't incredibly difficult, but you can't quite be careless. He's split up into multiple sections, all utilizing Pac-Man's moves perfectly. Toc-Man is built similar to Pac-Man, and it's easy to tell what to do because whatever he does, you do right back. His first phase sees him throwing Pac-Dots at Pac-Man, and so you take the dots that scatter from his throws and throw them back at him. The next phase sees the 4 switches rise up, and Toc-Man begins butt bouncing around, and you can probably make the connection there. The last phase, and definitely the hardest phase, is the rev phase. Toc-Man will rev up, and your goal is to attempt to dodge it. I say attempt because the way he moves makes it so that being able to move quick enough to dodge is super difficult. Luckily, throughout the fight, your Pac friends give you extra health, but after I'll give you a full recharge, you can't heal anymore. Luckily, the amount of health that your Pac friends give you lines up perfectly with the difficulty, at least for me. After a few attempts, I took out Toc-Man and saved the day. Well, that was an experience. I'm shocked I actually made it through the game. Is there any purpose for playing this version of Pac-Man World? Absolutely not. Except for maybe the Pirate World, this game is miserable throughout. While I respect the effort the developers put into this port, it's extremely obvious to me that the GBA was just not capable enough to run such a big game. I could imagine the DS running the game well, or perhaps if more effort was put into the final product, it could have worked better, but at the end of the day, this version is very much worse in just about every way compared to the original. There's absolutely no reason to buy this game anymore, considering the fact that the PS1 version is available on the Vita and the PlayStation 3, alongside the fact that PS1 emulation has advanced to the point where you can easily run the game on a phone. If you haven't already, give the PS1 version a chance, because at only $6, it's a fun time. This game often gets overshadowed by its sequel, Pac-Man World 2, and I think that's incredibly unfair to the original.
Well, I sure am spooked. Who knew that such a bad video game could exist? Good thing that's the only bad one out there. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.